Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. Great to be back at Grace City. Some of you weren't expecting me on stage this morning. I hate to disappoint you. It's not JD or one of the other cool guys that are here on a regular basis, one of the gifted communicators. It's just me. But good news, if you were expecting somebody else, they will be back next week. I won't be here, so come back next week, okay? Hey, if you are brand new to Grace City, I want to introduce myself, and even if you've been here a long time, still want to introduce myself. I'm Jason. My last name is Perkins. Because I was born in Australia to American parents, I have a very mixed up version of English that I speak, and hopefully it'll be easy to understand. But it also means, because I was born in Australia, and Australians love butchering the English language, like we love to butcher it. We love to cut words in half that are way too long, like my last name, Perkins, it's far too long. And so they cut it in half and they put an O on the end of it when I was a kid, and they have called me Perko ever since I was a small child. Very Aussie thing to do. And so if you hear people talking about Perko, or somebody introduces me as Perko to you, that's actually what many people around the world think my name is. Imagine what they think of my parents, naming their child Perko Perkins. What an incredible set of parents I have. They must think my parents were really, really crazy. But I am super excited to be here today in part 2 of this series, Expectant. And if you weren't here last week, as Mel said, JD kicked off the series. For those that are familiar with Grace City, JD's the lead pastor here, and he kicked off the first part of this series. And I just want to encourage you, you're kind of coming into the middle of a series. It's like watching a Netflix series in the middle, and you're trying to figure out what the series is all about. And you ask questions of people next to you, and they're like, just go back and watch the rest of the series. So I want to encourage you to go online, go to YouTube, and you can search for Grace City, and you'll find part 1 of the series. You can watch it, a fantastic message, and I just want to encourage you to make sure that you do that. Today we're talking about expectant prayer, but before I dive into this topic of expectant prayer, I would love for you to do a little survey with me, okay? And even if you're watching online, I'd love for you to participate. For those that are in the room, I want you to respond by just raising your hand. If you're watching online, you can just put a thumbs up emoji or something like that if you'd like to. But here's the first question of the survey, okay? First question is this: have you ever looked for your phone while you had your phone in your hand or in your pocket? Anybody willing to raise your hand? The 9 o'clock service were much more honest. The 11 o'clock, now remember where you are, okay? And who's watching. Of all the places not to be honest, this is probably not your best one, okay? So you gotta be honest. Now, let's go a little further. Have you ever been looking for your phone while you were actually talking on your phone? Anybody willing to raise their hand? You were walking around, where did I put my phone? And you were talking on the phone. I've done that before. Some of you in the room are honest. I appreciate that. Has anyone in the room, raise your hand or give us a thumbs up online, ever walked around looking for your glasses while your glasses were on your head? Anybody willing to be honest? Now, here's what I've noticed, okay? I've noticed something about the demographic. I notice the people that keep raising their hands seem to be in a similar season of life to me, or maybe a little bit older. And the people that aren't raising their hands are much younger, and I want to let you in on something. If you are much younger, that was a little window, a little sneak peek into your future, okay? You are going to spend much of your life as you get older looking for things when they are right in front of you. In fact, when I typically am looking for something around my house, I have a default thing that I go to, okay? When I'm looking for something and I can't find it, I normally yell out a name. And the name is Kristen. That is my wife. And my wife will respond with yes. And then I will proceed to ask her, hey, have you seen fill in the blank? And then she typically responds with, yes, it's on the shelf. Now, any other guys in the room or people watching online that when your spouse says on the shelf, you immediately begin to count the number of shelves you have in your home? And you're like, of the 50 shelves in our home, would you mind being more specific? That's typically what I ask. And so then my wife, Kristen, will say, it's on the pantry shelf, of which I immediately think, again, we have like 4 or 5 shelves in the pantry. Could you be more specific? And then she'll tell me it's that one at eye level. I can't believe you can't see it. I'm standing in the pantry. And then I quote, and I'll read this. This is a quote from my wife. "You wouldn't see it if it jumped out and hit you in the face." And she says that with all love and kindness and a little laugh, a little joke at the end. And I've found out that there's this thing called a man look, and it's kind of like mansplaining. You've heard of mansplaining, when men over-explain things. Man looking is when you search for things and you don't really look for it. And then there's what they call a mum look, okay? And I've had people tell me, they've actually asked me, have you had a mum look or just a man look? And the truth is, most of the time, I'm just looking kind of in the man look category, all right? Here's the deal. The problem isn't that the object wasn't there. The problem isn't that it wasn't there. It was I wasn't seeing it. That was the problem. It's not that it wasn't there. It was on the shelf the whole time. I just wasn't noticing it. And you know, I think this happens in more areas of our life than just our phone and our glasses or maybe your keys or your wallet. I think this happens in different arenas of our life, including the arena of our spiritual lives. And I want to just be very transparent with you this morning, especially if you're brand new to faith, or maybe you're not even new to faith yet. You're just on a journey, and maybe you're kind of looking into it and you're curious about spiritual things. Or maybe if you're really honest, you came today because somebody promised you they would give you a free lunch. If you just come to church with me, I'll buy you lunch afterwards. Or maybe they told you there's cute girls at this church, or there's some cute guys that go to this church. I don't know how you landed here or how you decided to watch online. But the truth is, if you've been following Jesus for any length of time, in fact, if you're brutally honest, you've been following Jesus for decades, you still sometimes wonder and ask the question, is God there? Even if you've been following God for a long time. I've been following Jesus for decades now, and there are still times in my life, if I'm being honest and transparent, which I want to be very transparent, there are times when I ask this question, is God there? There are moments when I wonder, is God there? Sometimes it's when I'm praying. Sometimes I don't ask God, are you there? I'll ask this question, is God listening? When it comes to my prayer life, sometimes I wonder, I'm praying all of these prayers, I'm talking to God, but is God actually listening? Or maybe you're asking God for a specific thing. Maybe you're asking God for some direction. Maybe you have a decision to make, and you're asking God, hey, should I go this way in my career? Or should I take that job? Or should I marry that person? Or should I do this thing? And you actually wonder, is God speaking? Like, I'm doing all the talking. Not only do I wonder, is God listening, but is God speaking? Does he speak still today? Or perhaps has he gone quiet? Oftentimes in our prayer life, we can run into these questions. Is God listening? Is he speaking? Or has he just gone quiet? I've begun to ask a slightly different question lately in my relationship with God. And the question is more like this. Is it not so much that he's not listening or he's not speaking or he's gone quiet? Is it possible I'm just not noticing? Or is it that I'm just not noticing? Or perhaps, what if God isn't absent? What if I'm just distracted with all the things that are going on in my world? You realize today, if you are alive today, you are alive during probably the most distracted generation that has ever lived. Of all of humanity, in the history of humanity, we're probably the most distracted generation that has ever lived. We have so many things to distract us. Our phones distract us. The screens in our homes distract us. Maybe our job, our calendar, all of the responsibilities we have. We live in a very distracted time. And I don't want to beat up on distractions too much this morning, because oftentimes we can be distracted by good things in our lives, even great things. But oftentimes those good things actually distract us from the best things in our lives. We're distracted by good things that cause us to miss the best things. That's the bad news. Got that out of the way, okay? Can take a deep breath. The good news is we're not the first generation, although we're probably the most distracted, we're not the first generation that has been troubled by this very issue. In fact, the very first followers of Jesus, the first disciples, the first followers had the same challenges in their relationship with God, this issue of distraction and not seeing him when he was present as we do today. I want to take us on a little bit of a history tour today. I want to take you back to the first century, to the very first followers of Jesus. Some of them, a couple of them today in the story that I'm going to share with you, were actually walking along a road when Jesus showed up in person and they still didn't recognize him. That's how distracted they were. Luke, one of the first writers, one of the first followers of Jesus, records for us all of the life and teaching of Jesus. And even if you're not a Christian or a church person or a Bible person, you probably have heard of some of the people that wrote about the life of Jesus. There are 4 accounts that we have of the life of Jesus. And the accounts were written by 4 guys, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We call those the Gospels. They're the first 4 books of the New Testament, the second half of the Bible. If you're not familiar with the Bible, it's split into 2 parts. In the second part, when Jesus shows up on the scene, we have these 4 accounts of the life of Jesus. Now, the most detailed account was written down for us by a guy that was actually a medical doctor in the first century, a guy named Luke, who said he wanted to give a detailed account of what took place in the life of Jesus so that his friend and all of us could understand exactly what Jesus' life looked like. And so in his account of the life of Jesus, Luke records for us this fascinating story of 2 of the first followers who were on a journey and they missed Jesus altogether. Here's the first scene. There's 5 scenes in this story, and I'm going to start with scene 1. These guys are now on their journey, and here's how Luke records it. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had just happened. Now, that same day, let me catch you up on what does he mean, that same day. This is the exact same day that Jesus rose from the dead. And they've just experienced, these 2 people who have been following Jesus for a period of time, they've just experienced Jesus being crucified, being buried, and rising again from the dead. In fact, that morning of the same day, these 2 ladies went to the tomb where Jesus was buried, discovered that he wasn't there. An angel appeared to them and told them he's not here, he's risen, just as he said he would. And those 2 ladies came back to the disciples. These 2 people were in the group, and they told them everything that had happened. That same day, these guys decide to take a walk from Jerusalem to Emmaus, about 7 miles or maybe 11.5 kilometers, about the same distance as if you left here after the service and walked down to the CBD of Auckland and walked back. It would be about the same distance, similar walk, about a 3-hour journey. And while they were walking, they're talking about everything that had just happened. That's the scene. Still in this scene, here's what Luke records for us next. As they talked and discussed the things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Could you imagine? Could you imagine walking along the road and all of a sudden a stranger appears out of nowhere and begins walking alongside you? What an incredible experience that must have been for these 2 people. That's the end of scene 1. Now, scene 2, Luke records for us. It goes on to say that he asked them, this stranger asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" And they stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" Almost like, Have you been living under a rock? Have you not heard what's happened in Jerusalem the last couple of days? Where have you been? Have you been living somewhere completely cut off from society? You don't know what's been happening? And then the stranger responds with, what things? What things, he asked. And they respond, about Jesus of Nazareth. They replied, he was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and the people. And then they go on to explain what happened to Jesus. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. And then don't miss this little statement. But we had hoped that he, Jesus, was the one who is going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it's the third day since all this took place. This phrase, we had hoped. These two followers of Jesus were disappointed in Jesus. Their faces downcast, Luke writes. I love the detail. Don't you love the detail that Luke gives us in the story? Almost like he actually was there and he saw what happened. Imagine with me for a moment, if you wanted to be the hero of a story, like, oh, I believed Jesus the whole time. I knew who he was. I knew he would come back to life. You would ask Luke, hey, could you just take out the downcast part? Could you take out the disappointed part? Like, make us look like we really believed. These guys were disappointed because they had put all their hopes, all their dreams, all their expectations for their country, the nation of Israel, to be freed from Roman oppression, and Jesus had not come through with what they had hoped he would do. I don't know if you've ever experienced this kind of thing in your relationship with God. If you're on the beginning of your journey with God, I want to be honest and transparent and tell you there are times in my life where I've been very disappointed because I had hoped God was going to come through. And for whatever reason, I don't fully understand, he didn't come through the way that I thought he would. Maybe for you, you've been hoping that God would come through in your relationship with your spouse. Maybe you've been hoping for a different kind of marriage and you're still waiting for that to happen. Maybe you've been hoping that you would even get married and you're wondering, God, are you listening? Are you going to come through? Are you going to help me out in this way? Maybe it's not in your marriage. Maybe it's with a child. You had hoped for a certain kind of future for your child. Maybe you'd been hoping that they would continue on in their faith. They would continue to follow after Jesus, but they've taken a different direction. They've taken a different path, and you're hoping that God is going to bring them back to himself. But the way you've been hoping for your child hasn't panned out the way you thought it would. Maybe for you, it's been a health diagnosis. Maybe you were hoping that God would heal you. Perhaps you've even asked him for years, would you take this thing away? And he's said to you, I'm not going to take it away. You've disappointed with what God has chosen to do with your health. Maybe it's a thing with your finances or your career, some part of your life that you hoped God would show up and you expected God to show up and do something, but he hasn't shown up at all. Many of us have been disappointed by God. I've been disappointed over the years. And I just want to be honest with you and let you know that in your journey of following Jesus, there are times like these two followers where you get your hopes up, and for whatever reason, in God's design, in God's plan, he chooses to go a different direction. That's the end of scene 2. Now it's scene 3, what they had hoped for. He goes on to say in scene 3, it says, he said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter into his glory? I don't know about you. I would hope that if I was downcast and disappointed and a stranger came along, their response wouldn't be, hey, stupid. Hey, are you slow? Are you a fool? Have you not seen what's going on? This stranger kind of calling them out. And then it tells us that the stranger goes on to do something. This is very ironic. Very ironic. Notice what happens next. Listen to what Luke records for us. And beginning with Moses and the prophets. Now remember, this is Jesus, but they don't think it is. He's just a stranger. Beginning with Moses and the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all of the scriptures concerning himself. See the irony? He's explaining to these two followers who have been following him why all of these things had to happen to him. In fact, Luke goes on and tells us that not only did he explain all these things, but in the next verse, it tells us that could we go to the next slide? Go back one more. I'm so sorry. That's my fault. He said to them, how foolish you are and slow to believe, and then he's unpacked the entire scriptures explaining who he was. So here's the scene. Jesus is there. He's explaining to them why everything had to happen to him in order to fulfill everything that was said about him from Moses and the prophets. Now, let's move forward to scene 4. Scene 4. Now we can go to the next slide. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going to go on further. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over, and so he went in and he stayed with them. So here's the scene. Jesus is going as if he's continuing on to another village. They're stopping in Emmaus, and they urge him. And says, Luke records for us, they urge him strongly. They beg him in a sense. I think that they knew something was special about this person. In fact, I think something was going on inside of them, so much so that they wanted to spend more time with this person. So they beg him to come in and spend more time. So he decides to go in, and then we get into scene 5, and he decides to break bread with them. In scene 5, Luke records for us, when he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then in that moment, their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and immediately he disappeared. Now just imagine the scene. They've just begged this guy to come in, stay with them. They're sitting down at the table. They're having an ordinary meal. They would have done this every night of the week. They would have broken bread. They would have shared it around the table. And immediately when they broke bread, he gave thanks. Their eyes were opened. And all of a sudden, I'm convinced that they probably thought to themselves, Jesus has been here every single moment of this day. Their eyes were open. Jesus has been there all along. In fact, I imagine they started to kind of think back throughout the day and say to themselves, how did we miss it? Like when he showed up, how did we not notice? How did we not recognize that it was him? In fact, Luke records for us that they begin to kind of go over their day. They replay the day in a sense. It says, they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They noticed something as they began to replay the day. They noticed that there was something different inside of them that shifted. You ever had that kind of an experience before? Just having a normal day and all of a sudden you just kind of notice something inside yourself. We're not very good about really noticing what's happening in our bodies. My wife is actually a counselor by profession, and she'll constantly say to me, Jason, do you notice anything happening in your body? Like do a bit of a scan of what's going on inside of you. A friend of mine actually says that your body is not a minor prophet, it's a major prophet. You should pay attention to what's happening inside of you. These guys, as they review their day, they notice, do you remember when the stranger, when Jesus was explaining the scriptures to us, there was something burning inside of us, something inside of us that shifted. As I was reading the story and reflecting on them, kind of replaying the day, I was reminded of the past month where I've become absolutely enamored by world football. Anybody else got into the World Cup a little bit this month? Okay, a few fans in the crowd, okay. I just fell in love with the game all over again. It's been so fun to watch. And I noticed something in each of the games, almost every game, at some point in the game will pause, the referee will pause the game, and he'll go over to the sideline, and he'll walk up to a television, the VAR, the recording of what's happening in the game. Because he's wanting to make sure, or she's wanting to make sure that Did the foul actually get committed? Should I call the penalty? Did they actually score the goal? Were they offside or were they onside? And they go over to the video replay and they slow down that particular play, frame by frame, replaying what happened to see exactly what took place. I imagine the two of them sitting at the dinner table after Jesus disappeared, slowing down the day, frame by frame. How did we miss it? How did we not notice that Jesus was with us the entire day? As I think about that, I'm reminded of an ancient prayer that I want to introduce you to this morning. It's an ancient prayer. It's about 500 years old. The original prayer was started by a guy named Ignatius of Loyola. Saint Ignatius lived between the late 1400s and mid 1500s. And during that time, he didn't start off as a follower of Jesus. In fact, as a young man, he had incredible ambitions to become a famous military leader. And he chased after these ambitions with real gusto. In fact, he was in a battle and he was severely wounded. He had a cannonball actually hit his leg, damaged his leg terribly. And it was during the long recovery that he had, and he was bored in bed, he couldn't move, that he asked for some reading material. And he had a deep burning desire inside of him to become this famous military leader. And the only reading material that they brought him, there were two books. One was a book on the life of Jesus, and the other book was on the life of saints. You can imagine this military guy going, surely there's got to be some better material out there to read. But he noticed as he read through the life of Christ and as he read through the stories of the saints, he noticed something inside of him changing. Remember that burning that they noticed that was inside them when they were with him on the road? Ignatius noticed something similar. He noticed that his passion and his desire to be this famous military leader was starting to drain out of him, he describes it. It was no longer there. And he noticed that all of the sudden inside of him was a burning desire to follow Jesus. Every time he read about the life of Christ, he was excited about it, and this burning desire inside of him. As he read about the saints, he said, that's the kind of life that I would like to live. And what was happening inside of him actually became a prayer that he would pray every evening, and he taught his followers, those that were a part of the Ignatian spirituality movement, still today, 500 years later, every evening, they pray a simple prayer of examen. It's called the Prayer of Examen. Each night, they just pause to replay their day, to slow the day down, to slow it down frame by frame and reflect on the day. This is not a prayer like some of you might be thinking, like Our Father who art in heaven, like a prayer that you just recite evening by evening. This is a prayer of reflection. And what Ignatius would teach his followers to do was to look for two things. Look for consolations and desolations throughout your day. Those are two fancy terms that we kind of don't use much anymore, some older historical words, but here are the questions that Ignatius would invite us to pray or to ask in this prayer of examen. Under consolations, he would invite you to pray and ask God, where did I sense God's life in me today? As I replay my day, where do I sense God coming to me? What gave me joy throughout my day? Where did I notice this passion or this burning inside of me, this joy? What increased my faith or my hope or my love today? And then Ignatius would encourage you, after you pray this prayer of examen with these questions, to then pray and ask God to show you, where were the desolations in my life today? Where did I lose peace? What drained me today? Or where did fear, anxiety, or control begin to take over? A simple prayer of examen to reflect over the day. Ignatius believed that learning to recognize God's activity in ordinary life was one of the most transformative habits a Christian could develop. Learning to recognize God's activity in the ordinary moments of life was one of the most transformative things, practices, or habits that a Christian could develop. So I want to invite you this week. I'm going to give you a simple invitation. And the simple invitation is this week, I want to encourage you to just begin to pray the prayer of examen each night. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, maybe you're still asking those questions. Is there a God? Does God really listen? Is God speaking? Can I trust him? Is all of this real? Even if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, I would encourage you. In fact, I would kind of dare you to pray this prayer each night this week, this prayer of examen. Might even double dog dare you. That's like a real dare. But I want to give you a caution, okay? I want to give you a caution about the prayer of examen. Each day as you replay the entire day, maybe you spend some time reflecting on different moments throughout the day and begin to recognize how God has been at work, where you notice God showing up throughout the day. I want to caution you with the prayer of examen. Be careful, because as you do this each night, here's what I've noticed happens in my life. I begin to notice him all throughout the moments of the day. In fact, this morning, I got up early to come to church, got into an Uber, and I was riding in the back seat of the Uber. And all of a sudden, I thought to myself, you know what? Jesus is actually with me here in the Uber in the early morning. And then I looked out the window and I saw the most spectacular sunrise this morning. And it was almost like God was reminding me, I'm in the ordinary moments of every single day. Maybe it's sending an email, maybe it's sitting on a Zoom call, maybe you're making lunch for your child's school bag, or maybe you're even paying a bill. I know that sounds crazy. Ordinary things like paying bills, and God shows up in that moment. Be careful of the prayer of examen. It may just take over your entire day. You might start seeing and noticing God in the ordinary moments of life, because I'm convinced expectant prayer, that's what the prayer of examen does. It turns it into an expectant prayer. Expectant prayer reveals the extraordinary presence of God in the ordinary moments of life. That's what expectant prayer does. It reveals to us the extraordinary presence of God in the ordinary moments of life. That's my hope for you this week, is that your life would be transformed. Not just seeing God in the extraordinary where he shows up in big ways, but seeing him, expecting him to show up in the ordinary moments of everyday life because of his extraordinary presence. Could you imagine? Imagine for a moment. Think about this week, maybe even into the months ahead. Imagine your life all of the sudden noticing all throughout the day, not spending large portions of your day distracted and not aware of his presence, but imagine a life where you're actually noticing his presence every single moment of the day. You know what Jesus called that? He called that abiding in him, where you're constantly aware of his presence. He said, if you remain in me and I remain in you, what will happen? You'll bear much fruit. Your life is going to count. But then he said, apart from me, you can do nothing. You want to have that abundant life, that fruitful life? I believe it starts with this expectant prayer life, where I begin to examine the day, reflect on the day, recognize where he's been at work. And all of the sudden, expectant prayer, I start to notice him in the ordinary moments of everyday life, and it transforms my life. Let me pray for you this morning. Father, I thank you. Thank you for this incredible story. Thank you for preserving the story of these two walking on the road to Emmaus. Thanks for Ignatius introducing us 500 years ago to this simple prayer of examen, that each night we just replay the day, reflect on the moments, and recognize where you showed up. God, I pray that it would transform our days, every moment of the day, where we would expect you to be a part of even the ordinary things of our day, that we might abide in you and you in us, and you would bear much fruit. God, help us to know. Give us the wisdom to know exactly what we need to do with what we've just heard. And would you give us the courage to do it? I pray in Jesus' name, amen.